ECOWAS have been like messing up a big time in Africa. They have been messing up heavily. So recently, Nigerian military generals arrived Niger Republic on a surprise visit. We never expected that so quick because we know that Niger already left ECOWAS. And we know that the president of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, which is the current chairman of ECOWAS, will know his stance when it comes to Sahel, the Sahel Alliance. We know that he never ever agreed to that. But it's surprising that he sent his generals to Niger at this point. Many people are saying that it's alleged that the seizure of Nigerian private jets in France resulted to this. That I think was it last week, Nigerian private jets, presidential jets was seized. If not even one, I think the three of them was seized by China in France, by a Chinese company in France rather. So the Nigerian government find that disrespectful. They find it disrespectful. They even call it a geopolitical, like a breach, a kind of that it was so disrespecting for them to seize the private jet of the president of Nigeria. So they went to Niger in order for them to discuss more. We know that ECOWAS have been a supporter of France. They've already stand with France. But now that Nigerian presidential jet is being seized in France, are you getting the point? That's when they become like, no, they are not supposed to do this. They are not supposed to do this. You understand? But let's just watch them.
I think clearly Niger is very strategic to Nigeria's interests because it has been a good neighbor from day one. During the Civil War, Nigeria's time of greatest need, a lot of pressure was put on Niger by the French government to support Biafra. Niger resisted that pressure, supported Nigeria, and in fact, participated on our side in the Civil War. Our relations with them have always been very good, and good neighborliness is one of the key principles of Nigeria's foreign policy of concentric cycles. So those who are immediately around us, our closest neighbors, are the most strategic for our interests. It was unfortunate that the differences developed last year over the coup, especially on the question of the possible attack on Niger Republic. And it was not at all surprising that they reacted in a way to defend themselves against what they saw as perceived threats from neighbors, including Nigeria. I think we can't continue along that line of tension and conflict with our neighbors. So it is very good that this brokering of peace by the Chief of Defense Staff is on course, and the indications from the meeting are very positive in terms of accepting to resume cordial relations and, above all, cooperation between Niger and Nigeria.
So Ibrahim, I'd like you to touch on the multinational joint task force and the implication of this signing of the MOU on that. I know that we haven't had very, well, shall I say, good relationships with Niger following the coup, but now it seems like Nigeria is softening, and that might also have an impact on the MNJT. What's the impact of this MOU on that?
I think the impact is very significant. For over 1 year now, cooperation between Niger and Nigeria in terms of the war against Boko Haram has been suspended, and the joint patrols and joint actions being carried out by the two countries against terrorism have ceased. And I think one of the main objectives of this MOU was precisely to be able to resume that cooperation against terrorists. I think it is very significant that the government of Niger has accepted to resume that cooperation and collaboration in terms of the joint work of the joint task force. It is important for our security. It is important for our future, and I'm glad that's happening.
Okay, I'd like to ask, number one will be, do you think this will be a segue into bringing Niger back into the ECOWAS fold, or they are still going to have alignments with Russia, as we have seen in the past? And we know we are brothers, we are neighbors and all of that, but what about the global implications? Because Niger has some level of alignment with Russia, and we have the influence of Prigozhin's group, Wagner in Niger, and we saw some of the flags being touted during our protest in Nigeria. Vis-a-vis in Nigeria that has its own partnerships with America and the West and all of that, and you know what is going on, the proxy war going on in Russia and Ukraine as we speak. So are there international dimensions to this?
Well, I think, first of all, it's in Nigeria's strategic interest for Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali to return to ECOWAS. That return is, however, going to be very difficult because, first of all, the three countries have now formed a confederation. They've moved from the earlier phase of a military alliance into the establishment of a confederation amongst themselves. The second problem is that all the three countries have military regimes in charge, and the principle of ECOWAS is total opposition to the change of government through unconstitutional means. This means the three countries will have to renounce military rule, engage in a transition to democratic rule before they can come back to ECOWAS. The question is, are they ready to do that? So far, there are no indications that they are not ready to do that. The next question is whether Nigeria and ECOWAS would compromise and allow them to come back without renouncing military rule. I think that will be a definitely wrong approach to the issue. ECOWAS has prospered precisely on the basis of the normative framework it has established based on the deepening of democracy. And I don't feel that we can change that path that we know has been good and positive for West Africa. Now to the question of the geopolitical implications of this event. Clearly, it has been a successful opening for Russia to have an inroad into West Africa, and some of the geopolitical battles being fought at the world level are now directly in our doormouths, and that therefore we have to think through carefully what our approach is. Specifically for Nigeria, our key foreign policy position is that of strategic independence. We don't want to be under any sphere of influence, and we want to fully exercise our independence. In that case, what do we do in a changing world where Western and American hegemony is being successfully challenged by a new alliance where Russia, China, and other key third world countries are key players? I think Nigeria has to evaluate its position in terms of how do we relate with the BRICS countries that are at the center of this new alliance? Do we join with vigor and use that to assert our strategic position, which is that we are not choosing one camp, but that given the changes occurring in the world, we feel our strategic interests would be best served if we join BRICS? That's the question before Nigeria. I'm not at all sure what the position of the Nigerian government is. I'm not sure whether they have actually been carrying out a review of our foreign policy. But if they are not doing that, I think the time has clearly come for us to do that so that we can develop our own strategy along which we can defend our core principle of strategic autonomy.
But will you say that between March and now, the policy recalibration that we have witnessed from the Nigerian side, that, you know, this is a case of Nigeria eating the humble pie. This is a case of Nigeria having initially, overshot the mark. Because when, you know, Nigeria, along with ECOWAS, imposed the sanctions, yes, it was to show a sign of disapproval. But there were people from the north who said that the closure of the border, 1,600 kilometers between Nigeria and Niger, was affecting the economy in the north, was causing humanitarian issues. Even members of the House of Reps spoke up and said it was not strategic to close the border. And now we've gone back to what those northern representatives and other leaders of thought in the north said. Will you say that the Tinubu administration overshot the mark and now, you know, has begun to do, to act in his own sovereign interest?
I think there's no doubt that the Nigerian government and ECOWAS made strategic blunder and scored an own goal in terms of the actions it takes. The first issue is that in international relations, you don't issue a threat that you cannot fulfill, that you cannot stand up to, because threatening to restore the Bazoum regime by force and then failing to do it simply weakens you in terms of the people you are confronting at that point in time. So it was very clearly a blunder, and we shouldn't have done that. The second issue, which generated a lot of concern, not just in northern Nigeria, but throughout the country, is the risk of starting a war. You can start a war confident that you can finish the other side in a question of a couple of days, which is what the Nigerian side assumed would happen. But there's no guarantee that that war won't drag, won't spread, and wouldn't be a major problem for you spreading over wars, which seeing what happened in Ukraine, where Russia thought it will take over that country in 2 or 3 days. And now 2 years on, they are still in a war that's dragging on, but spreading even into China. So I think the Nigerian response in terms of citizens to the idea of starting a war was that no, we should be very careful, and we can be getting into murky waters and worsening our security crisis in the country. And I think eating the humble pie, as you put it, is in a sense the only sensible thing we could have done, because the mistake has been done. You can't undo it. What you can do is try to correct it with a reasonable measure. And I think now that Nigeria has done that, we can only congratulate them for seeing sense where they should have seen sense in the first place.
All right, seen sense where they should have seen sense. But, you know, in addition to the mutually benefiting relationship, especially on the military front or security front that we enjoy with our neighbors, Niger, there are also concerns around some infiltrations of some unpalatables, if I could put it that way. we had cited the issue of the Russian flags being hoisted during the recent End Bad Governance protests. Now, we also understand the influence that Russia has had in Niger Republic, for instance, with regards to their coup. We've talked about arms proliferation and terrorists, border control. How does this MOU affect that? Because there are also concerns around that. It's not just the benefit, it's also how we are able to address some of these ills from, crossing over to Nigeria. Are there any measures or protection? Are there any concerns and measures to that effect?
I think the history of the Russian flags in the Sahel is well known. You'll recall about 1.5 years between the July 2023 coup in Niger, French troops were moving from Mali to Niger, and when they entered Niger, people were demonstrating against them, and the French troops killed citizens of Niger who were demonstrating against their presence in the country. That generated a lot of anger in the country, and that was when, out of anger towards France, some of the advocates against French neocolonialism went and sold Russian flags and started using it in their demonstrations against the French army. So that was the history, and that's how it started over 3 years ago. In that process, this news that getting Russian flags and using it to demonstrate is a good way of fighting neocolonialism, and specifically in this case, harassing France out of the country through instigating a radical army coup. So that's the history, and I think when it reappeared during Nigeria's demonstration, some of those people involved must have been very much aware of what had happened in Niger years before, and which also had spread to both Burkina Faso and Mali. But I think there's a sense in which the comparison in terms of Nigeria's reality are extremely different. First of all, Nigeria doesn't have the situation of the type of French neo-colonial control that exists in the Francophone countries. We don't have anybody running our government from abroad and giving directives on what to do and taking our minerals and not paying for them, which is what those Francophone countries were starting. So I understand the depth of anger in Francophone Africa over what France has been doing to them. But we don't have a comparative situation in Nigeria, and therefore the comparison, the use of the same strategy or tactics cannot have the same effect. I think the second issue is that we have a much stronger tradition in Nigeria of the military completely withdrawing from political engagements. And I think since the beginning of the Fourth Republic, the military have made it very clear that they have absolutely no intention of political adventurism. Right. And I think, therefore, I said of political adventurism. And therefore, I don't think we stand the risk of the use of Russian flags having the same effect in our country as it has had in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Jubrin Mohammed. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, sorry. And we will be hopefully having this conversation as we continue to explore relationships with Nigeria, or between Nigeria and Niger Republic.